Welcome to Marine Tech Talk, a podcast about how Teledyne Marine's innovative technologies are enabling scientific discoveries and commercial tasks in the world's oceans and waterways. This episode begins a special four-part series on Silbo, Teledyne Webb Research's autonomous underwater glider that recently made the first ever circumnavigation of the Atlantic Ocean by an unmanned underwater vehicle. In this episode of Marine Tech Talk, we're joined by Ben Allsup, the Technical Support and Operations Manager for Teledyne Webb Research's Slocum glider. Ben discusses how Silbo got its name, the overall plan for the voyage, how the various ports were determined, and some of the very interesting challenges that the glider faced on its way from Cape Cod to Ireland. Now here's our guest, Ben Allsup, with the host of Marine Tech Talk, Melissa Rossi.
Welcome to Marine Tech Talk. I'm happy to welcome all of our listeners back to the show. Today we'll be speaking with a colleague of mine, Ben Allsup, the Technical Support and Operations Manager for the Webb Research gliders. So if you're in the glider world, I wouldn't be surprised at all if you have met, spoken to, or at least heard of Ben. He's pretty well known in the industry, and he's been working with gliders for quite a long time. Today, we're going to be talking to Ben about a historic event that actually occurred earlier this year when a Webb Research glider, autonomous glider named Silbo, completed a circumnavigation of the Atlantic Ocean. So, hey Ben, welcome to the show and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm glad to be here.
Ben, can you explain to our listeners how the Silbo journey actually got started and, well, how Silbo got her name?
Sure. So Silbo was originally named poetically Unit _212, rolled off the production line at Webb Research as a capital expense glider in 2011. And at the time, we knew we were building Silbo, or Unit 212, to ship off to the Canary Islands to participate in a glider meeting that was happening there that year. And Clayton Jones, a colleague also at Teledyne Webb, suggested at the time that, you should pick a name quick or somebody else will. So I started doing some research about the Canary Islands where Silbo was going to make its inaugural deployment as part of the glider school that was happening there, and found that there was a language in the Canary Islands, a language called Silbo, that is essentially a whistling language. I thought it was sort of an apt name for the glider going there for its inaugural voyage.
Wow. So Silbo actually eventually went on this journey, which took quite a while. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It ended up being a four-leg journey around the Atlantic. Was that really the plan from the beginning? I mean, was that the master plan for Silbo's journey? And were the stops significant in some way, or were they mainly determined by distance?
So it goes back to those initial meetings in the Canary Islands. During those same meetings, a group of Teledyne employees, the upper management, and the Canary Islands delegates were there, and Rutgers professors were all sitting around having a dinner and some drinks. And at that time, Teledyne had also just recently purchased Gavia, a autonomous vehicle producer that's based out of Iceland. And we were all sitting around talking about pushing the edges of the technology or the capabilities of the Slocum gliders and what we could do next. And I sort of harebrained idea throughout, because I'd never been to Iceland. Why don't we ship this glider back up to Iceland from here and fly it back through the ocean to the Canary Islands again? And kind of to my surprise, everybody at the table and sort of the upper management and educational teams said it was a great idea. And, I think within a couple months, I was in Iceland deploying Silbo with a colleague, Chris DeCalvis, and Silbo then swam back to the Canary Islands on its first sort of long, what is now described as the Challenger mission leg. That goes back before the circumnavigation. So when we successfully did that, it sort of snowballed from there, where we decided to continue doing these long transits to sort of push the technology, make sure that the the vehicles were robust, developed new software and hardware to facilitate these really long missions. When Silbo made it back to Cape Cod in the mid-2010s, we re-outfitted with a new style of batteries, what we call a 4S battery, 4 in series lithium batteries, which is our greatest energy density to date, and put Silbo back to being an elongated glider, meaning extra batteries, and loaded the newest set of software and deployed from Cape Cod for the circumnavigation in 2016. That wasn't planned as a circumnavigation. I don't think you think that far ahead at the time. The plan at the time was potentially, and the plan one at the time was I was hopeful that we would launch from Falmouth and recover in Falmouth in the UK. And as gliders do, they sometimes have a different plan. So we ultimately didn't make it to Falmouth, Cornwall, but we made it into port in the southwest of Ireland, in Baltimore, a town or village in the southwest of Ireland, in Cork.
That's really interesting. I suspected that maybe the circumnavigation wasn't planned, but it is interesting to know that. When the glider left the Cape, what was your goal for the trip to what was supposed to be England? And what was it out there doing specifically?
The goal was, it was the first long-term deployment with the 4S batteries and with the newest versions of the low-energy software. So we have a feature that allows the computer essentially to go to sleep more than normal, to conserve energy on the computer. And it also is engagement with the universities. In addition to Rutgers, mentioned previously, we have relationships with the University of Las Palmas, Gran Canaries, and students who work through Slocum, a research facility in the Gran Canaries, and as outreach. So, there are students, class students at Rutgers that are regularly watching and monitoring Silbo's progress during these legs, and they're discussing the data, and the data gets fed to the global models through the U.S. Infrastructure for publishing glider data, essentially, the GDAC. So they're ingesting all that data. And then lastly, when we did get to Ireland, to go back to your previous question, the timing was just right to go to another one of the Slocum glider schools. So the next leg was sort of determined by the fact that we knew if we deployed relatively quickly after arriving in Ireland, we could fly Silbo back down to the Canaries and, participate in a second glider school there.
Oh, that's cool. So you were talking about the piloting and the collaboration with Rutgers and others. Were any of them actively piloting the glider to Europe from the Cape, or was that actually being done here and they were just accessing the data?
They're accessing the data primarily, but there were active, especially as we entered the Gulf Stream during that initial legs in 2016. Antonio out of Las Palmas was very active in sort of helping with path planning and how to get to the correct currents and suggesting waypoints. But ultimately, all the actual changes were done by the Teledyne crew and team. But through a collaboration with both Rutgers and Antonio comes to mind. Antonio in Las Palmas was very energetic in suggesting waypoints and how to get into the fast-moving Gulf Stream most appropriately. I'm reminded of him sort of counterintuitively having us put a waypoint that was southwest so that we could catch it, the very, very strong, to go east, right? So he said, put a waypoint to the southwest and we'll catch the quick easterly current quicker. And he was absolutely right. We went from, going, less than 15 kilometers a day fighting a current to doing close to 50 or 60 kilometers a day, which was spectacular for a glider.
So in the end, the trip from Cape Cod to Ireland, I think we decided took about 330 days at sea and traveling a distance of just over 6,500 kilometers. Did you have any concept in the beginning of how long it would actually take to make that journey? And then I'm just curious whether it ended up being longer or shorter than you originally thought.
In some ways, it included some of the longest human days of my life, and I'll get to that in a moment. But before a deployment like this, you do a bunch of math, right? So you measure sort of the total distance to the place that you want to go and how much energy you have in the batteries and what that means that you can afford to use for energy per day, and do you believe the glider can consume that little amount of energy per day? And in this case, we knew going in that to do an ocean crossing like this, you'd have to use fewer than 2 kiloamp hours per day on average. And that's right about where these gliders tend up being with it's a limited science set that they're doing. So we're doing 2 CTD casts a day. That's the science package on the vehicles, and a very small amount of engineering data and very slow flight. So it's steady state, slow flight of about 20 kilometers a day. So you sort of throw those numbers around, if you do 20 kilometers a day using less than 2 kiloamp hours per day, how far can you go? And, the math works out to thousands and thousands of kilometers or an ocean basin. And then you sort of cross your fingers it all goes well and that those numbers seem to be right. As far as the overall plan and the redirection to Ireland, that resulted in a rather bad mistake on my part. I won't go into too many gory details but the short version is the glider went off course to the north on its own for a month and a half, and we ultimately ended up closer to making port in Ireland than any place else. And luckily did get the glider into port just fine at the end of that first leg. But it was close. We ended up using essentially all the battery, or what we thought was all the battery. That's another nice thing about these tests. It has convinced us that there's a little bit more energy or usable energy in these battery packs, truthfully. And you only learn that maybe and get confidence in that being the solution or a possibility when you run into these end-of-life predictions for batteries and actually how far you can push that. We've been fortunate that it turns out you can push it quite a bit.
Sounds like the way I run my truck, right down to E, because I know it'll go a little bit further. So on that trip, obviously there was the diversion from England to Ireland, but did you encounter any obstacles or weather conditions that further delayed the trip, or anything that you weren't expecting besides what you'd already mentioned?
No, for the most part, it was the big obstacle of this trip was me and human error and making a pretty boneheaded mistake that cost us our original route plan and caused a little bit of dismay for a month or two. But it all worked out in the end. I don't recall any sort of major storms, but I do believe we did have a hurricane go somewhat nearby at one stage, and there was a big storm going into Ireland about the time we made landfall. But I think other legs of the journey, we had more significant encounters with weather.
Just curious, how often do you have to monitor a glider like this flying remotely for so long? How often did you have to watch the glider, and how many people were actually involved in piloting that glider? Were you doing it all by yourself, or did others need to step in periodically?
So we have a team, the glider support team, that sort of flies all the Teledyne Webb owned gliders, and I lead that team. So I'm kind of always paying attention, but in the different legs, we had different people who were sort of co-pilots throughout this journey. And, I think we have a concept of lead pilots and co-pilots, and I would describe myself as the lead pilot throughout. But glider piloting is 24/7, and Justin Shapiro, Joe Gradone played pivotal roles throughout, Brian Bertrand as well. We also always consult with Clayton Jones, as mentioned, and Krista Colobus and Dave Pingle in the software group when questions come up. But, the day-to-day was, the support group sort of checking in. And to answer your question about how often you need to check, there are periods where you might need to do something, but largely what we're trying to do is, it's an autonomous vehicle and pick settings and missions that allow for autonomy. And I would check in essentially daily to make sure that things looked like they were going normal and that there was nothing awry, but not actually do what you'd call piloting, more just monitoring that the vehicle's doing what we'd expect it to do. And then, I would say interactive piloting was very rare, right? Where it's maybe in most cases when you're just flying across the ocean, you might change a waypoint occasionally once a month or change some settings minimally. But for a good portion, it was really just monitoring, where you're making sure that the vehicle's coming up on time and heading the right direction and no unusual energy events are happening with the batteries or systems, checking just the standard systems that everything's working normally.
Overall, Ben, would you say that the journey, this first leg of the journey, met your expectations? Was the team happy with the outcome from the glider, both performance and the information that you gathered during that trip?
Yeah, I think, there are very few gliders in the world actually doing transits like this, and they can contribute to the global models, I believe is what we've decided. They can be steered or fly through places where, say Argos floats aren't, and contribute to what the models are contributing to our understanding of the ocean. I was ecstatic with the end result once we recovered the glider in Ireland, because I literally thought that I killed the glider at one point during the middle of the mission, and that we would never see the vehicle again. So I was ecstatic, and truthfully, it was good timing in that we were, needed to do a glider training, and we were able to invite a group of people and participate in a standard sort of basic glider training using Silbo in Galway for a 1-week training session. So arriving in just the right time to participate in a training session in Ireland, which went very well, was also very rewarding. So there were a number of very rewarding aspects to finally picking that glider up in Galway for sure. Baltimore, just south of Galway.
Yeah, I'm sure it must have been pretty exciting to see the successful culmination to that mission. What does that really mean, potentially for customers out there, and how does that help scientists, do what they're trying to do with autonomous vehicles better? Or, I'm just curious, what we were able to prove here and what that means to our customers.
Well, there's a number of different new software releases that were proven out to the low energy mode that I mentioned previously. That allows for, I can think of a handful of groups that can now use that feature with confidence and know that it's going to help them increase the length of their missions when they also do very long length missions, or increase the efficiency of the vehicle when they need it, if they're going to be pushing towards the edge of using the full battery packs on long deployments. It helps convince the community of how robust the vehicles are, that they can go out for these long missions and survive and work the entire time. Glider's now gone around 1.5 times around the Atlantic Ocean. So it really, as a person who supports the vehicles, it gives me confidence that, the gliders are going to go out there and that you can solve the issues as they come up. And it gives the glider support team that same confidence, and I think a little bit of pride, right? That you can come into the office and say, we've got this vehicle that's, doing something that's never been done before.
Yeah, hear to that. I know after Silbo finished its mission here, as you are well aware, we had a little celebration here at the office, and I think that was the fun thing to see, is that everybody from production through finance, everybody was really proud of what the glider had accomplished and what we as a company and the science itself were able to accomplish with that journey. It really brought everybody together, so that was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ben. I'm looking forward for our listeners. So this is the first of a 4-part series on Silbo. We'll be speaking with, in future episodes, with Justin Shapiro, who will talk about, I believe, the Ireland to Canary Islands voyage, Clayton Jones for the Canary Islands to St. Thomas, or I might have that backwards, and Joe Gradone for the final leg from St. Thomas to Cape Cod. So if you enjoyed today's discussion about the glider and our first leg from Cape Cod to Ireland, I guarantee you're going to enjoy the rest of the story. So please be sure to look for the next episode and tune in. Thanks again, Ben. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with customers as always. So appreciate your finding some time today to talk to us.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Marine Tech Talk podcast. For more information on Slocum gliders, visit our website at www.teledynemarine.com/slocum-glider. There's a press release on the website that also details the journey, as well as a recorded webinar on the journey that can be found on our Link webinar channel. For more information on how Slocum gliders are helping researchers and commercial customers explore and understand the ocean, you can Google Slocum gliders or search Twitter for posts from our many customers. If you like this podcast, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're hearing this show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.